Welcome to this, another exciting edition of the Golden Rule. I can't wait to get into this. You know, many people discount the reality of God manifesting himself in a miraculous way today. They insist anything miraculous stopped 2,000 years ago when the apostles died. Well, you can believe that if you want to, but it's not true. And I want to show you a couple of examples of what happened in the Bible. You say, yeah, well, that's in the Bible. Well, I'll get on with it afterwards, some other things. But in the Bible, in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, God talks about supernatural gifts of the Holy Spirit. And one of them is called the word of knowledge. That is where God makes known to a man information that he has had no way of acquiring through natural means. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. In Acts chapter 9, there was a man named Saul of Tarsus. He was a Pharisee. He was a high-ranking Jewish leader. He hated Christians, and he was on his way to Samaria to kill a few of them. Carry him back to Jerusalem, torture him a little bit, and then kill him because he hated Christians. Well, on the way, he met Jesus. Met Jesus? Yeah, he met Jesus. He's walking along. All of a sudden, a bright light shone, and the intensity was so great that he fell to the ground, and then he heard a voice. And the voice said, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And Saul said, who are you? And the other guys with him heard the voice too. They didn't see anybody. He says, I'm Jesus, whom you're persecuting. And you go on into town, and I'll give you your instructions. Saul said, Lord, what do you want me to do? And Jesus said, go into town and I'll tell you. Well, when Saul got up off the ground, he couldn't see. He was blinded. And so the guys with him just took him by the hand and led him into town. And he spent 3 days in town at the house of a man named Judas. And he didn't eat or drink anything for 3 days. He was just fasting and praying because he'd had quite an encounter. You would too if you had an encounter like that. Well, anyway, during into the third day, it says here in the Bible that Acts chapter 9 verse 10, and there was a certain disciple at Damascus named Ananias. Just a plain old Christian, nothing special about him. Just loved Jesus like a bunch of others. And his name was Ananias. And to him said the Lord in a vision. There's a whole lot right there. God spoke to a man named Ananias. He spoke to him in a vision. The Bible says, in the last days, your young men shall see visions, your old men shall dream dreams. It's a vision. These are real folks. These are real. Visions, dreams from God are real. So, Ananias, the Lord said to him, Ananias, called him by name, and Ananias answered. He said, behold, here I am, Lord. And the Lord said to him, get up, go into the street which is called Straight, inquire in the house of Judas for one called Saul of Tarsus. Behold, he's praying, and he has seen in a vision a man named Ananias, that's you, coming in and putting his hand on him that he might receive his sight. Where did Ananias get all this information? From God, who said to him in a vision. And Ananias went to the house, knocked on the door, and found Saul. And Saul was expecting him because God had shown him in a vision a guy named Ananias coming in to pray for him. So it was a setup on both ends. Ananias was prepared, Saul was prepared. They both had supernaturally imparted knowledge, which they had no way of naturally acquiring. And that's the way God operates. Here's another one. Here we have the account in Acts chapter 10 of a Roman soldier named Cornelius, who was not a Christian. He had an awareness of God, as do many people today. They're aware that there's a God, but they don't know him personally. They just know him at arm's length. Yeah, there's a God somewhere, and he's very powerful, and he does all kinds of stuff, but what's that to me? Well, God wants it to be something to you because he wants to relate to you personally. So Cornelius was in his house and he was praying at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And an angel showed up and said, Cornelius? And Cornelius trembled. And what would you do? You're sitting in your living room praying, and all of a sudden you're not alone anymore. Nobody walked through the door. They didn't knock. Just there. What would you do? Well, Cornelius said, yeah, what is it? And the angel said to Cornelius, there's a guy named Peter, Simon Peter. He's a traveling evangelist, and he's presently visiting a house in Joppa owned by another man whose name also is Simon, and his job is he tans leather, and his house is located by the seaside. Send for him. I've heard your prayers. I know that you want to know me better, and Peter will tell you how to do that. How did Cornelius get this information? An angel told him. An angel sent by God. I believe in angels. I believe in visions. I believe in dreams. I believe in words of knowledge where God speaks spirit to spirit and tells you things that you have no natural way of knowing. So Cornelius sends 3 servants to Joppa, a 2-day journey. And just about the time they're arriving, Peter is up on the roof of this house he's visiting. He's just kind of hanging out, waiting for lunch to be served. And all of a sudden, he sees a vision. And in the vision, he sees a sheet let down at the 4 corners. And there's when he gets low enough to see, he looks in and there's all kinds of unclean animals, according to the Jewish tradition, unclean animals. And he hears a voice. Rise, Peter, kill and eat. And Peter says, no, Lord. Did you ever say no, Lord? That doesn't work too well either. No, Lord, I've never eaten anything that's unclean. And God said, the voice said, don't call common what God has cleansed. And this sheet went up and down a total of 3 times. Each time said the same thing. After it went up the 3rd time, the Spirit of the Lord spoke to Peter again and said, you're about to hear a knock on the door. There's 3 guys coming to fetch you. They want you to go with them. Go with them, doubting nothing. I have sent them. Knock, knock, knock. Oh boy, here we go. So Peter goes downstairs. Who are you looking for? Looking for a guy named Simon Peter. He said, yeah, that's me. What do you want? I want you to come with us. Okay. And Peter didn't know what was up. Didn't have a clue. But the point is, God speaks to man in various ways, and one of them is called the word of knowledge, supernatural gift. And there are many people say, that doesn't happen today. Barry, don't you get it? It doesn't happen today. That's all gone away with. Well, try and explain that to the pastor who just pulled in his driveway at 10 o'clock at night, Bob Weiner. And he and his wife had been gone all day on meetings, and she'd gotten out of the car, was headed into the house, and all of a sudden the Lord said to Bob Weiner, there's a girl 3 blocks down, 16-year-old girl, sitting on the curb, crying her eyes out. She's about to take her life, and she's praying, God, if you're real, send somebody to help me. So Bob calls his wife, says, honey, come back in the car. And she says, I'm tired. What do you want? He says, God just spoke to me. God spoke. So they got in the car, and guess what they found 3 blocks away? They found a teenage girl, 16 years old, crying, wanting to take her life for whatever reason, but she was desperate. And God didn't want her to take her life. He wanted to rescue her, to save her, to deliver her, to keep her from killing herself. And he needed to use a person. So he used this man and his wife. If you don't believe in God speaking to people today, you have to explain that experience. It was real. It happened. He knew who was going to be there, and he knew what was going to happen. How did he know? Well, if you don't believe in God, you have to explain it. So clairvoyant or whatever type of conjured up excuses that people use to deny that God does these things today, the fact is, he still does them. So I want to ask you, has God ever spoken to you? When I first got saved, when I first became a Christian, and I started to read this book, I read, and God spoke to Adam, and God spoke to Noah, and God spoke to Abraham, and God spoke to Jacob, and God spoke to Isaiah, and God spoke to Jeremiah, and God spoke, and God spoke, and God spoke, and God spoke, and God spoke. God spoke to a guy named Noah. He said, build an ark. Here's how you build it. Here's how long it's going to be. Here's how wide it's going to be. Here's how high it's going to be. Here's how many floors it's going to have. Here's how many rooms, doors, windows. Gave him specific details. How did he do that? God spoke. And God is still speaking to people today. But the problem is they don't believe it. And so if they hear his voice, even if they hear it, they disregard it. Because they don't believe that God speaks today. And that can have life-threatening consequences, as with this 16-year-old girl. If they hadn't gone to help her, that girl might very well have taken her life. So let me ask you, has God ever spoken to you? And some people say, well, yes, he speaks through his word. And that is absolutely true. And if you can't obey God when you hear his voice through this book, then the chances are greatly reduced that you'll hear from God when he speaks to you heart to heart. Another friend of mine, Dutch Sheets, some of you may know him. He's got a nationwide program called Give Him 15. As a young man, he was a rebel, and he knew God. He'd known God once upon a time, but he'd gone off the rails, and he was into drugs and all kinds of stuff, and just wasn't living for God at all. And one day, while he was standing right in front of a 6-foot-high speaker that was blaring loud, and he was standing right in front of it, he heard the voice of God saying, Dutch, what are you doing here? That's all he said. That's all the Lord said to him. Dutch, what are you doing here? And Dutch knew exactly what that meant. He knew he was out of sorts with God, and he knew God's voice. So, I'll ask you again, have you ever heard God's voice? And if you have, what did you do in response? I got so many testimonies. One man was told by God to raise a young boy from the dead who had just drowned. And he said, no, there's too much confusion here. There's people crying and screaming and moaning and groaning, and I don't want to cause a fuss. I've raised the dead. I never raised anybody from the dead. No, you've never done anything until you've done it the first time. So, it was David Hogan. And after they buried the boy, David prayed and repented. He says, God, if you'll give me another chance, I'll obey you. And he had another chance, and he raised a person from the dead. And he says, at that point, I became invincible. There was nothing that the devil could threaten me with that I wasn't able to say, I have the power of God. I have the authority of God operating in my life, and I'll raise the dead. I'll heal the sick. I'll cast out devils, because that's what Jesus told me to do. His voice, right here, Matthew 16, Matthew 10, Mark 16, says, go to you, Christian, heal the sick, cleanse the leper, raise the dead, cast out devils. Go, preach the gospel. Christians, we're supposed to do this. That's what Jesus did. That's what the apostles did. And that's what he tells us to do. But so many people don't do it. And as a result, folks are dying that don't have to die. Folks are being tormented all their lifetime by demons that don't have to be tormented by demons, because the Christians aren't doing what they're supposed to do. Are you getting anything out of this today? I get excited. I just love these accounts because they spur me on to believe God for bigger and better things. I've seen dead raised. I've seen miracles. They happen today. And so here we are. Another program ended. Sorry it has to go so quickly, but God bless you. It airs 42 times a week, every 4 hours. So check it out again. Tell other people if you found anything worth passing on to others. God bless you. See you next time.